There will be no peace without Turkey. Erdogan has challenged both the West and the Kremlin at the same time. Erdogan is breaking all the molds. Istanbul instead of Budapest. Erdogan has intercepted the meeting of the century. Beijing has struck at Moscow. The Kremlin is losing the Far East, and Turkey is preparing to become the new capital of the world. I'll tell you all the details in a moment. Greetings. This is Ukraine Today. I'm Victoria Panchenko, and here are the latest events. A global sensation, there will be no peace without Turkey. Erdogan wants to bring Putin and Trump together. Turkey is once again at the center of the global geopolitical game. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has announced that Ankara is ready to host a historic meeting between the presidents of Russia and the United States as soon as tomorrow. While Europe is losing the initiative, Erdogan is acting proactively, hinting that Budapest has failed in its attempt. Istanbul is ready at any moment to write its name into history.
We are ready to host such a meeting at any time. It's a pity that the meeting in Budapest did not take place. We believe that any dialogue is useful for ending this war.
Let us recall that the day before, Trump announced that he had cancelled the meeting with Putin, which was supposed to take place in Budapest, explaining that it just didn't feel right. However, the US president did not rule out such a summit in the future. At the same time, Erdogan insists that Turkey is the only country trusted by both Moscow and Kyiv, and it is precisely this that makes it the ideal venue for negotiations that could change the course of the war. He did not miss the opportunity to remind that Ankara has been calling for dialogue since the very first days of the conflict.
This gives us an advantage on the path to peace, and we intend to use this situation for the benefit of humanity.
Analysts are abuzz. Erdogan is not just offering a platform, he is demanding recognition that without Turkey, peace is impossible. The meeting of the century or a political spectacle with the highest stakes. One thing is clear, Erdogan has once again made the whole world talk about Turkey. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has embarked on a trip to Asia. The president's goal is to reach a number of agreements on trade, the supply of critical minerals, and ceasefires in several regions before meeting Xi Jinping in person. All the details are in the following report. A global shock. China has made a 180-degree turn. Moscow was left with nothing. Instead of support, the Kremlin received a slap in the face. Beijing coldly threw its ally overboard. A sensational twist, Xi did the unexpected. On October 30th, during the APEC summit in South Korea, the chairman of the PRC will meet with Donald Trump. The US president states that the leaders will discuss China's reduction of Russian oil imports. Trump noted that the situation is already developing in favor of reducing Russia's oil revenues and added that India has completely stopped purchasing oil from the Russian Federation.
Which is what China is doing. I don't know, you probably saw it today. China is significantly cutting its purchases of Russian oil, and India is reducing them entirely. And we have already imposed sanctions.
The American leader also expressed confidence in the prospects for trade agreements with Beijing. According to him, both sides have a very good chance of reaching a large-scale and mutually beneficial agreement. Sanctions, the possible authorization to use US long-range weapons deep inside Russia, and the refusal to meet with Putin in Budapest. It seems that Donald Trump is seriously angry with the Kremlin dictator. How will recent events affect Russia and Ukraine? Does the US really play the key role? And what role does China have? Find out more in the following report.
The cancellation of the meeting in Budapest, the green light for strikes with long-range British and French missiles on Russian territory, and sanctions against the two largest oil companies of the gas station country. Donald Trump has finally seen the light and decided to crush Putin. What is really happening in the White House?
I've always felt that Putin wants everything, not just a part. I think now he's ready for negotiations. We don't want him to get everything.
As soon as the green light was given from the Oval Office, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee sprang into action as well. There, they supported 3 legislative initiatives aimed against Russia, which started the war in Ukraine. Among other things, this includes recognizing Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism and the use of frozen assets. However, the Senate itself admits that it's not possible to vote on these bills due to the government shutdown. Nevertheless, in just one day, it seems that across the ocean, attitudes have shifted. They've turned their backs on Putin, but as analysts point out, it's too early to award Trump the Hero's Medal. Donald, just like before, doesn't want Ukraine to win. He simply wants everything to end as soon as possible along the current lines, pin a badge of the great peacemaker on his lapel, and shift all the subsequent problems onto the Europeans.
Trump is acting according to his own logic, meaning Ukraine wants peace. They said yes. We stop at the line of demarcation. So that's it. Ukraine is ready to take the shortest and simplest path. Russia doesn't want that. So according to Trump's logic, pressure needs to be put on Russia. What happened in the form of these sanctions? At the same time, according to Trump's logic, if tomorrow the Russians say, okay, we're ready to negotiate a ceasefire, they will go to these negotiations and will be ready to lift sanctions and make some other concessions. He hopes that with the help of sanctions, he will be able to reach Putin's reason. He'll say, okay, we're losing, you're losing, let's look for ways to get out of this situation.
Trump, who thinks like a businessman, analysts say, didn't take into account the main thing, the logic of Putin. A dictator doesn't care about the impoverishment of millions of Russians or the stagnation of the economy. He has his own priorities, and he has no intention of changing them, neither under the stick nor the carrot.
He lives for war, you see. The future Russian economy, oil prices, none of that bothers him at all. There will be money for the front, there will be money for the army, there will be money for recruiting soldiers, and the soldiers themselves will be found. Those who have already been there for 3 years, 4 years, there will be more. That's all he thinks about, and he probably believes that everything is going just fine. And as for what might happen later, if something collapses, if people end up living badly, if there's no gasoline or something else is missing, they'll find gasoline for the tanks, and everyone else will just have to walk. That's basically his entire logic. He doesn't feel sorry for anyone. Not just Ukrainians, he doesn't even feel sorry for Russians. So really, what is there to be surprised about?
So far, the only one to react to the demonstrative shift across the ocean has been the unpredictable Dmitry Medvedev, whom analysts say isn't worth reacting to at all. On the contrary, not a single word from any official figures. And most likely, in Moscow, they'll pretend that everything is going according to plan.
Obviously, they don't have any kind of response yet. Medvedev is playing the role of the bad cop and is being rude to Trump. But as we've already seen over the past year,
Putin and Trump don't insult each other. They are polite, they just tease each other a little. That's why I don't think that Putin, even if he makes some radical statements, will insult Trump or say that we're now enemies. He'll probably just say something like, well, I got a bit carried away, let's talk, we'll work things out. I don't think we're in for anything like him coming out crying and saying, that's it, it's over for me, I renounce power, I lost the war, the new sanctions have crushed me.
Will Vladimir Putin be able to roll everything back, and will Trump fall for empty promises and stalling tactics? It's obvious to analysts that, unlike the meeting in Anchorage, the US president realized much faster that the desired showdown wasn't going to happen. But it seems the pendulum has swung. According to the media, India and China will be forced to give up from Russian black gold.
China's state oil companies have indeed suspended purchases of oil from Russia after U.S. sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil. The companies have decided to refrain from new deals, at least in the short term. This will affect 30% of Russia's seaborne oil shipments to China, most of which are bought by private refineries. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has arrived in Japan as part of a series of visits to Asian countries. After Japan, Trump will head to South Korea, where he will meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping to discuss a trade agreement between Washington and Beijing. Moreover, the U.S. president intends to discuss Russia's war against Ukraine with the Chinese leader.
I would very much like China to help us with Russia. I will talk to him about how we can end the war between Russia and Ukraine, whether it's through oil, energy, or something else. And I think he will be very receptive.
The Republican added that he has a good relationship with the head of China, and he expects that the meeting scheduled for October 30th will go very well. In turn, U.S. Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker stated that the planned meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping will be crucial for ensuring China's cooperation on sanctions against Russia.
Obviously, the meeting with President Xi will be decisive in this matter. You know that. Right now, the Chinese are buying too much Russian oil and gas. They are providing the Russians with too many dual-use technologies, allowing them to continue this war, whether it's parts for drones or other technologies that can be used to prolong the war.
Experts tend to believe that the upcoming meeting between Donald Trump and Xi could become the most important diplomatic negotiations of this fall. They will determine the balance between the U.S. and China, on which the further strategy regarding the war in Ukraine depends. Xi Jinping gave Putin a slap in the face. Moscow was expecting support, but instead received a public rebuke before the whole world. The balance of power is shifting. Beijing is betting on itself, not on a doomed Russia. Tensions are rising, and now Russia is turning into a colony of the Middle Kingdom, an unexpected twist. The axis of power is clearly shifting. The first details of Russia's public humiliation are coming very soon.
China is Russia's main partner, helping it keep its economy afloat and continue the war in Ukraine.
What were they shouting?
They were shouting that China is great. China is great. Hooray for China. In Chinese.
I count on maintaining ongoing, effective, and productive contacts with President Vladimir Putin in various forms for the benefit of the dynamic and long-term development of China-Russia relations.
But is that really the case? After all, at the same time, China denies selling weapons or components to Russia, and Chinese banks have stopped transactions with Russia because of sanctions. Pairs, threes, tens of millions of Chinese soldiers. That would be just what we need right now.
And why do you think so? Why not? Why? What do you think only soldiers should die?
Oh, when I look at the Belgorod region, I can't help but think about just how much we truly lack the presence of the Chinese army, the People's Army, in this area.
Very often, we frequently hear official statements from China that it has never sold any weapons to Russia, and that China supports the territorial integrity of Ukraine and wants an end to the Russian-Ukrainian war.
Just 3 years ago, propagandists were rejoicing, saying, let Western companies leave, we'll buy everything from China.
Now, we've bought a truly wonderful and impressive Chinese car, absolutely amazing, and many, many times cheaper than the cars we used to buy before. I bought myself 3 pairs of stylish Gucci shoes, each pair costing 2,000 rubles. Wonderful, probably made somewhere in China as well. I hope also here in our country. Fake, of course. As a matter of principle, I now only buy fakes.
There's no need to even comment on how that turned out. That so-called Chinese support for the Russian economy resulted in the bankruptcy of Russian manufacturers.
And just look at what, for example, the soldiers are driving. What they're driving Russian-made cars, right? You have to be a real patriot to drive a Patriot. Because it costs a fortune. It breaks down all the time, and the spare parts are insanely expensive. That's why the guys drive Chinese vehicles. And now they need motorcycles. Russian ones? No. For some reason, yes, there are very few Russian ones. There aren't any Russian ones at all. That's exactly the point, isn't it? No, Russian motorcycles don't exist. So what is it then? They're not aware of it. If you look at the Russian Federation from an economic perspective, they simply use it as a basic sales market. As for, let's say, the military, in the military industry, civilian mechanical engineering is practically, as they say, reduced to zero.
And Russia has literally turned into a raw materials appendage of China. By the way, Foreign Minister Lavrov came up with a very apt metaphor, calling Putin Xi Jinping's donkey.
As they say in the East, a guest is the master's donkey. So the entire program, of course, depends on those gracious proposals that the Chinese president and his team made to our president.
Basically, from an economic standpoint, all China needs is inexpensive raw materials, which, by the way, Russia has quite a lot of in large quantities. It's not just gas and oil, but also lithium, timber, valuable metals, and in fact, gold as well. In other words, all the things that are then used in China itself to produce goods for the entire world.
Moreover, this situation manifests itself in completely different aspects. China has officially approved new geographic maps on which part of Russian territory Bolshoi Ussuriski Island is recognized as Chinese territory. In fact, the Chinese have already settled huge parts of Siberia and turned the territory into their own colonies.
The Chinese dragon is unlikely to stay on the sidelines simply because it actually has certain historical claims to a significant part of our Far East. And that's a fact.
Of course, at first there was enthusiasm, but gradually it faded, and eventually we all realized that Asina had become a Chinese colony. It's simply a slave-owning enterprise. A slave-owning enterprise or a prison, call it what you will, where they appoint overseers to keep the workers in check, because there is still resentment no matter what. And the workers in Asina even staged a protest called Asina is not China. And they also they regularly threaten, saying you won't be able to get a job anywhere in this city. Here's your black mark. So sit quietly and keep your mouth shut for your 15 to 30,000.
They are very good at waiting. And this ability to wait, it's also about the integration of the Chinese into the territory of the Russian Federation. In fact, this is already by and large Annexation, and even more than that, if you pay attention, on some Chinese maps, certain regions of the Russian Federation are already labeled with Chinese names. Well, listen, why would you need to declare war for that? After all,
Russian television is already showing videos about how to find a Chinese husband, and in Russian schools and government institutions, Chinese language is being actively studied.
It is divided into two camps. Those who want to study and those who are skeptical about it and say, why do we need Chinese? We're not planning to go anywhere. I answer them very simply, actually. I say, I'm not teaching you Chinese here, but rather using the Chinese language to make you think with your head. And that skill will always come in handy.
Putin constantly tries to characterize relations with China as a strong friendship. But China's Xi Jinping literally spat in Putin's face by taking away from Russia that very great victory.
And just yesterday, my friend and representative of the PRC treated me to this Peking duck. Honestly, I'll tell you, there were just two pieces there. I thought I'd only eat one piece. You get what I mean, right? But I couldn't resist, I ate the second one. You know, it was just too delicious.
China and Russia, as the main theaters of military action in World War II, made a decisive contribution to the victory over fascism and thus laid the cornerstone of the post-war world order.
China and Russia are neither friends nor partners. And here's what's important. As soon as China has enough motivation to limit its cooperation with the Russian Federation, believe me, it will do so. Russia, in fact, has no choice at all. Either be friends with China now or face economic collapse, and as a consequence, political, military, and all other kinds of collapse at the same time.
It turns out that China is not helping Russia save its economy or win the war at all, but is simply taking advantage of its weakness to seize its resources and strengthen its influence in Asia.
It seems the Far East is slipping out of Moscow's control for good. While the Kremlin is at war, China is extending its economic tentacles. North Korean migrants are changing the region's demographic landscape. Moscow is just watching and doing nothing. Does this mean the Kremlin will simply give up the Far East? Or does it have no choice? Find out all the details right now.
Russia is losing the Far East. Not officially, but in reality.
Without any exaggeration, the Far East has become the most important factor in strengthening Russia's position in the world, our flagship in the new global economic reality.
While the Kremlin is preoccupied with the war, China and North Korea are quietly dividing the region with Russia.
I would call it a creeping takeover, a creeping migration. For now, of course, control over the Far East still remains in Moscow's hands. But there are more and more Chinese there, and they are playing an increasingly significant role in the economy. But, as they say today, they play a big role in the economy, and tomorrow they'll play a big role in politics.
More than 1 trillion rubles in investments from China. It sounds like aid, but it's all centered around trade, not the development of the region.
China needs to use Russian resources on the cheap, and accordingly they will have that opportunity. And that's why I think that the economic dependence of these regions on China will only continue to grow.
Also, the Chinese have long ceased to be guests in Russia.
The East is simply not needed. It should just be given to the Chinese. That's what they want to do. The Chinese can just come in and that's it. No one here will resist. There will be no one to resist and nothing to resist with.
According to various estimates, up to 2 million people live from Vladivostok to the Urals.
So to speak, settling these territories with Chinese people and in various forms. This includes both the individuals who have migrated themselves and mixed marriages from which children are born. And accordingly, these regions are becoming more and more closely tied to China.
Now about North Korea. In the past year alone, more than 15,000 North Koreans have officially arrived in the Far East and unofficially up to 50,000. And that's not the limit yet. Another 153,000 new labor contracts have already been ordered.
There is a shortage of labor in Russia today because so many people have been killed in the war, and accordingly demographic problems still remain. So yes, there aren't enough of their own people, and North Korea in this sense is an excellent supplier of labor resources because the people are disciplined and accordingly know how to march in step in every sense of the word.
So it turns out that Moscow has handed over the region for temporary use. But why?
Putin needs people whom he thinks are easy to control. It doesn't matter whether it's him directly or through others. That's why he's confident that these people won't start a revolution, won't protest against Moscow's actions. He thinks these are very convenient people, and it would be good if Russia were populated by just such convenient people. After all, with your own people, who knows what might happen?
But everything comes at a price. And the longer the Kremlin turns a blind eye, the more important the question becomes. Who is really in control of the Far East?
In reality, today, of course, Russia is, in the current geopolitical landscape, essentially functioning as a vassal state of China, a position that China primarily leverages in order to exert significant pressure on the European continent and its various nations. And we must clearly understand that the true and most significant global confrontation occurring today is, of course, not actually between Russia and NATO, but rather between China and the United States, as well as between China and Europe. In this particular case, today's Russia can be compared to a loyal guard dog that dutifully obeys and follows all the commands and instructions given by its master without question or hesitation.
So what happens next? Can the Far East still return to Moscow's real control, or will the opposite happen? The influence of China and North Korea will only continue to grow.
The influence of China and North Korea will only increase. And accordingly, China itself will decide whether it needs to formally take all of this under its control, or if it's enough to have, let's say today, complete economic control, and tomorrow that will become complete political control.
It seems that while Putin is focused on seizing other people's territories, he is gradually losing his own. And ironically, these territories are being taken not even by enemies, but by the Kremlin's allies.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.